Diving into hormones and the hypothalamus. I did insert some funny graphics and memes along the way just to keep some of this information lighthearted. Hormones everywhere. We have Buzz Lightyear telling Woody from Toy Story. And so lots of different hormones, but we'll be focusing on specific ones here. The neuroendocrine system is the principal driver of reproductive function in men and women. The term endocrinology describes the study of cell-to-cell signaling via hormones that travel through the bloodstream to influence remote targets or locations. And neuroendocrinology refers to the involvement of the central nervous system in this process, the brain and the spinal cord. Specifically, looking at the hypothalamus, a region of the brain that links the nervous and endocrine systems via the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland can be divided into two regions, the anterior pituitary, which signals cells to secrete hormones, and the posterior pituitary, which stores hormones for later release. Overall, the main goal of the hypothalamus is to maintain the body's state of homeostasis or balance. Breaking this down, making it a little bit easier here with a nice graphic. First off, we're starting off in the brain. And if we were to take a little square and zoom in on the area we're focusing on, that square would be right there and bring us to this nice complex where at the top here we have the hypothalamus, and at the bottom here we have that pituitary gland. Remember, we have those two divisions of the pituitary gland. We have the anterior division and the posterior division. Two hormones in particular are going to be stored for later release in that posterior pituitary gland. We have oxytocin, which we'll talk about a little bit more when we dive into lactation and the postpartum. That being said, you'll notice there's a red square around oxytocin. And so there are a lot of hormones here, but the ones we'll be focusing on overall will have that red square around them. The other hormone from the posterior pituitary gland is antidiuretic hormone, which helps with blood pressure regulation by influencing the kidneys. The anterior pituitary gland is where it gets a little bit more complicated, and it has 6 hormones that are produced here. We'll start off with thyroid stimulating hormone, which influences the thyroid gland and helps with things like regulating metabolism. We also have adrenal corticotropic hormone, which influences the adrenal glands. We'll talk briefly about growth hormone because it influences the development of muscles and strength. We'll be talking about prolactin a little bit more, again with oxytocin when we dive into the postpartum, as its main role is in milk production. And then the next few slides will really be focusing on follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which influences the ovaries and testes. Looking at the relationship between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the gonads is known as the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, also known as the reproductive axis. The primary functions here are the production of egg cells and the synthesis of sex hormones, which is why we're starting here in particular. The term gonadotropin refers to any hormones secreted by the pituitary gland that affect the male or female gonads. The release of gonadotropin, releasing hormone, from the hypothalamus is the primary signal from the brain that's going to regulate sex hormones. To make it simpler, we'll abbreviate it as GnRH throughout here too. So now just breaking it down into this relationship. Again, we're starting off at the hypothalamus here at the top. And so I did actually color coordinate this along the way. In gray, we'll have what's applicable to both sexes. And then in pink later on, we'll see specifically what happens within females. And then in the barbell rehab red, we'll see what happens in males. And so gonadotropin releasing hormone cells from the hypothalamus communicate with that anterior pituitary gland. That anterior pituitary gland is then going to release follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. In females, that's going to influence the ovaries to help with things like the development of a follicle or egg and the production of estrogen and progesterone. The hormones estrogen and progesterone are then going to communicate back to that anterior pituitary gland and hypothalamus to help with further regulating the concentration of those hormones. In males, we still have that follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, but it's going to influence the testes to help with sperm production as well as the production of testosterone. Testosterone, as well as two of its byproducts known as DHT and estrogen, are then going to communicate back to that anterior pituitary gland and the hypothalamus to further regulate the production of those hormones.